Hey everyone, this is your first look at the astrology of 2025, a year that I'm not saying this lightly, has a lot of big changes in it, and it's one of those years that for a while I've wondered about. Actually, I have to be honest, when I was looking ahead to the astrology, not just this year and next year, but even like a few years ago when I was like, what's going on with 2020? That's how I feel about 2025. What's going on with 2025? It's not to say that 2025 is going to be 2020. Of course not. But 2025 has a lot of changes. Namely, it has three outer planets and new signs. So we have Pluto and Aquarius as of right now, not quite the beginning of 2025. We have Saturn going into Aries, we have Neptune going into Aries, and we have Uranus going into Gemini. And something that I'll go through in this presentation is that astrology is like time, it's telling time, it's the different hands on the clock, and whether that clock is a collective clock or a personal clock, you can tell that in 2025 the hands on the clock are beginning to point towards new hours. So what does this mean? Bare minimum, we know that it means that something about 2025 marks a new chapter, and I would even go as far as to say a new era. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for our presentation today. So this is the astrology of 2025. And as I record this, it is December 17th, 2024. So we are just a couple weeks before the end of the year. Definitely, every time I get to this time of year, I do a year ahead look. I've said this before and I'll say it again. It is a lot of information. I'm going to do my best to sort of bullet point it. Of course, I could go do a deep dive in a lot of these different subjects, and I will save that for future webinars. But so it's not a 7 hour webinar. We need to sort of keep it a little bit more surface, but we'll go through sort of the bigger highlights for the year, looking also at the months, and then of course, what does this mean for you? For those that don't know who I am, my name is Katie Sweetman. I'm an astrologer. I'm also a psychic medium. That should be fixed. That should say living. I don't know. I am living. I was living in the New York City area for 20 years. At present, I'm currently in Central Maryland with my father, who is older, and it just sort of highlights on a personal level why this time is such a huge time of change. Because if you asked me 3 years ago if I'd be living back home in Maryland, I would not have said yes. But sometimes lives, and then I'm living. So I created Empowering Astrology in 2010 to show how astrology and consciousness can help us live better and more soulful lives, because astrology is just time. Don't forget there's you, your part, and also the energy of consciousness to be able to see, and especially in terms of 2025, what this time is going to open up for you. So this is our rough agenda today. We're going to, of course, have an introduction, which I'm doing now, learning about time. We have to cover some basics, and I realize that possibly the gamut of people that are watching either live or listening to the recording, you could be anywhere from new to astrology to actually quite seasoned in astrology. But the idea is that we just need to make sure we're all on the same page about some fundamentals, because that will make sure that we understand what is happening in 2025. And then, of course, we're going to have a little bit of monthly overview, just sort of looking at the bigger bullet points for each month, and then a sign-by-sign guide. So, introduction, part one. I think it's human nature to look for signs. I think that's why we come to astrology, mostly from a personal lens. So we want to know about ourselves, we want to know about our personalities, we want to know if we're going to have love and fortune. And of course, that's a very human question to ask. But I think we live in times where the reason astrology is, let's say, more part of our cultural narrative is that we're seeking, we're exploring, we're trying to find answers. We're looking towards the heavens, and maybe the old structures or even the old institutions aren't there anymore. And how do we find answers? And how can astrology perhaps give us some road signs as to what is on the horizon. I think it's really important to understand just fundamentally that astrology helps us define the hour. That's the thing. I wish astrology gave me black and white answers. I would be a millionaire. I wouldn't even be doing this. I would maybe like be on vacation or something. I don't know, being silly. But if it said who and what, that would make things a lot easier. But astrology typically just says when, the quality in which that something may happen, and maybe some of the archetypes, but it doesn't give black and white answers. That said, it is about looking at the clock, our personal clock, and the collective clock. Also, there has been a lot of change in the last few years. That is a gross understatement. I think we have to laugh about it a little bit, I hope, over just looking back at the last few years. Um, I think a product of that is reflected in the astrology. We had Uranus and Taurus. We still do, although that's beginning to change. And Taurus really talks about the things that are rock solid, locked down, the things that typically you don't want to change. But there has been change in the last 5, 6 years, and a lot of change. We had Pluto, some big Pluto movements over the past few years. But then I think there's the other side of things, and I think this is where astrology doesn't quite give us all the answers, at least from this perspective. I personally believe, and maybe you feel things differently, that we are in a time of rapid personal growth, rapid collective growth. The energy just seems more and more and more intense, and I don't 100% think the astrology gives us the answers to like the metric and the why that's happening. But that's why I think each year it just seems like, what's going on? What's going on? Because we can at least objectively say, even if we see the world differently or really believe in different things, is that the life even that we lived in 2018 may not even exist anymore. And so 2025 is an ending of old cycles and the beginning of something new. As I was saying in the introduction, when we first started the recording, we have a lot of planets changing signs. And you could say, well, Katie, the planets are always changing signs. And that is true. But there's the difference between the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. These are planets that change signs every month or every couple of weeks or every 6 weeks versus planets that haven't changed signs for 16 years, 14 years, 13 years, 6 years, and even the case of Saturn, 2.5 years. So it just tells us that something is beginning to shift and change as we go into 2025. So, part two, the art of